Everybody's biggest fear, instilled upon them since childhood, is a home invasion. The thought of someone you don't know coming into your home uninvited has been nightmare fuel for me ever since I can remember. In this episode of Reddit Stories from Hell, I will go on a deep dive that is the pit of despair that is Reddit to find some hopefully true home invasion stories that made my skin tighten just reading them. This is Reddit Stories from Hell, Episode 1, Home Invasion. When I first went on to look for stories, there were so many to look through, and the stories only being first-hand accounts of what happened, it's hard to figure out what is fact and what is fiction. Keep in mind, even though the story itself may be told through an unreliable narrator, the anxiety and fear instilled upon the OPs is still very real. The first story that I am going to read was published in 2024 by the user Spooky Mennonite. I'm still pretty jarred from this experience, but I figured it would be easier to share about it than to keep dwelling on it. A couple days ago, someone broke into my house while I was sleeping. I work the night shift, so sleeping during the day is something you learn to get used to. Around 6:30 p.m., I heard what I thought was a loud knocking sound coming from outside. My dogs were going absolutely ballistic. For reference, I live on a farm out in the middle of nowhere. My closest neighbor is about a half a mile away. I somewhat woke up, but I didn't really think anything of it, since my neighbors like to shoot their guns, and it was hunting season. As I started falling back asleep, my heart just started fluttering weird, like I knew something wasn't right. That's when I heard loud footsteps through the house. The dogs were still barking, but that started to quiet down. That's when I really began to worry. The footsteps I heard stopped on the other side of my bedroom door and didn't move. I thought to myself, is this how I'm going to die? And although I had a weapon in my room, I know I couldn't get to it without being heard. It felt like an eternity before the steps started moving around towards what I think was my brother's room. I heard rustling loudly through the house and things being thrown. I know now that they were in my brother's room. Some of his friends are into some seedy situations, and I knew it had to be one of them. I heard footsteps coming back to my door, and the doorknob handle started moving abruptly. I immediately turned my back towards the door, closed my eyes tight, and put a hand over my mouth to keep from making any noise. The door opened, but that's it. The intruder left as I heard a car drive down the road. I finally bucked up my courage and got out of my bed. Everything in the house, except for my brother's room, was undisturbed. I called my brother immediately after and asked if any of his friends were coming over. He said not that he knew of, and I told him about the situation. He got off the phone with me to start calling around. I went back to bed and I noticed that I still had my window cracked open from earlier. I also realized that my sheet had come off my bed and that I was only wearing a t-shirt. If it was who I think it was, this wasn't a random event. One of my brother's friends had always had eyes for me, and the fact that he saw me sleeping in just a t-shirt made me freak out. Either he took something out of my brother's room or knew I was home alone sleeping before work. I don't know. I'll post an update soon when I hear from my brother. You move out to the country to get away from the activity of city life and let your guard down. That's when something like this happens. Sometimes country life isn't so safe after all. The post had no updates whether OP found out who it was or what it was. The home invasion was real. Even in the silent seclusion of the countryside, danger is still imminent. Sometimes seclusion makes threats even more dangerous. Either way, I hope OP is okay and got everything figured out. Sometimes what we believe to be real is only a figment of our own imagination. Our mind playing tricks on us. In this story titled Possible Home Invasion, or just Paranoia, published in 2019 by OP HLEIGH000, OP goes to house sit for a teacher and believes there could have been a possible home invasion. Some backstory. I'm 17 years old and about to be a senior in high school, and I worked at a vet clinic as a kennel worker for 2 years. My mom worked there, so that's how I was able to get a start working there before I was 16. So it's common for people to ask me to watch their pets or help them with things that are pet related. That's how I ended up staying at one of my teachers' houses these past few days. On Monday morning, I went over to their house and started settling in. I should mention that they had just moved in a week ago, so the house was still fairly empty and there are quite a few boxes. I spent the day hanging out with the dogs, a younger dog named Milo and an older dog named Chili, until my mom had me go for dinner. I was gone for a couple hours and went back when the sun had just set. When I had left the house, I had turned off all the lights. However, when I got back to the house, the downstairs bathroom light and the front hall light were on, which unsettled me a little bit. But I just assumed one of their neighbor's friends had stopped by and came in. The key to their house is left under the doormat by the back door, which is something only me and a few other of their family friends knew. So I ignored it and I just started getting ready for bed. I decided to sleep in the living room because it was the coldest room in the house. I closed the doors which connected the living room to the dining room and the sunroom. The doors to these were all glass, which is going to be important later on. The dogs had settled down and I started to as well. Eventually, I fell asleep. I was woken up a few hours later to the dogs both up and growling at the doors, which scared me a little bit, because in the years I've known these dogs, I've never heard them growl or be aggressive once. But I figured it was just them being anxious, being in a new house with new smells and new sounds. So I brushed it off and went back to sleep. Tuesday night was uneventful. The dogs slept through the whole night and so did I. It was Wednesday night when things got weird. I got back to the house a little after 8 p.m. after having gone to work for a few hours. I was greeted at the door by the dogs. This was odd to me. I had to put them in the sunroom before I left, so they should have still been in there. The door leading into the sunroom from the living room had been opened, and the ceiling fans which were previously on had been turned off. I'm a pretty paranoid person when it comes to being home alone, so I immediately wanted just to leave. But I had promised my teacher I would sleep there with the dogs at night to watch the house. So I just closed the doors, locked down the house so I could start getting ready for bed. As I was laying on the couch, Milo kept pacing and staring up the stairs. What worried me was when he stopped and stood at the base of the stairs and started growling and barking up at the stairs. Again, these dogs rarely growl at me or get vicious, so I started freaking out a little bit when he did this. I tried calling him over to me, but he just continued to growl. Eventually he did come over to me and sat with me on the couch, but he continued to stare at the upper part of the stairs. I started trying to relax again and turned off the lamp next to me, and I laid down. The way I was positioned, I can see through the dining room into the sunroom. Their sunroom was all windows and no curtains. Maybe all sunrooms are like this, I wouldn't know. And the light from the street was shining into the room and lighting it up just the slightest bit. I started to doze off when I noticed that I couldn't see any light coming in from the street anymore. And this is when the dogs started going nuts again. Both of them got up and started growling. Milo went over to the stairs while Chili stayed at the door separating the living room from the dining room. I was freaked out, but I didn't see any movement in the sunroom. So instead of calling the cops or anything, I called my mom, who refused to come to the house to get me. So I called my grandpa and had him stay on the phone with me while I got my shoes on and bolted. I went out the back door so I can grab the key off the counter on my way out. And as I got to the gate leading out to the sidewalk, I noticed it was open a bit. I didn't even bother thinking about why it was open and I just ran. The way I went, there was a junior high school that separates the street that my teacher lives on, Street A, and the street that I live on, Street B, which is 2 streets down from the junior high. A lot of people cut through the parking lot as it leads right to Street A, so I decided to go that route. Here's where it started getting creepier for me. As I was passing the actual school itself, I noticed that one of the side doors to the school was open. The darkness from the hallway seemed like it was pouring out of the door, like something straight out of a horror movie, which is why it scared me so much, more than the incident at the house did. I started running faster and eventually made it home. Now I'm in my room with my dog typing this out, still freaking out a little bit. This post has no updates since the original posting date. Now I've been reading stories about successful home invasions, but sometimes they're not always successful and curiosity doesn't kill the cat. And that is the case with this story posted on June of 2019 by OP Sipple44. This happened about a year ago at my aunt's house. It was summertime and the weather had been exceptionally well. It was late at night around 3 or 4 a.m. Usually during summer I would stay up late watching YouTube or Netflix until sunrise. This particular night something happened that I never would have imagined. For context, the house we were staying at only had one bathroom and I had to go. It was currently occupied, and usually when that happens, I would go outside and pee in the woods. I decided to do that again. I went out there. It was mid-60s out, very warm and clear skies. There was a main street straight across from the house. I finished up and began walking inside. Before I opened the door, I heard a deep voice screaming, "Hey." I was a little startled due to the fact that it was late at night and someone was outside screaming. I thought it might have been some neighbors arguing, but this seemed like it was closer than that. I went back to look to see if I can see something, and to my surprise, I saw a dark figure standing in the middle of the road. Me, being an idiot, screamed back at him sort of jokingly, "Yo." The figure didn't move. At this point, I was creeped out because whoever it was didn't respond. Even though it was dark out, the lights on the side of the street gave me a little bit of a view of the person's face. It was looking directly at me, and motionless. I decided to turn back inside and let it go. I began to watch YouTube again for another hour or so. After finishing it up, it was around 5 in the morning. So I decided to call it a night or morning. Next day I woke up later in the evening and I went into the kitchen to get something to drink. My mom was in a state of shock. I asked her what was wrong, and she said there was a home invasion last night across the street. I was so disturbed I couldn't speak. I eventually got my voice back and I asked her, did they catch the man involved? And she looked at me and said no. The identity of the person is still unknown as per Reddit. I am sure there is a possibility the invader was found, but he could still be out there out and about. This last story, while not a home invasion story, is still very scary. I guess it could be considered the opposite of a home invasion story. The story, titled "Came Across an Incredibly Creepy Family a While Back," was posted on Reddit by OP Practical Sync 1484 in September of 2024. I never really post anything on Reddit, mostly just reading, so please excuse me if I do or say anything that isn't common courtesy here. In around 2018-2019, I, 25 female at the time, was 18 or 19. I was living in Nebraska where I grew up. I lived in the largest city in Nebraska, but it was still essentially surrounded by corn and wheat fields. The city was expanding, so rich folks started building huge houses with giant properties on the edge of town as things proceeded to grow. All of that being said, I had a good friend whose parents' house was one of those big ones right on the blurring lines between the fields and the city. My friends and I were constantly hanging out at his place because it was fun. They had tons of property to ride 4x4s on, a hot tub, a huge living room for us to watch sports and have a reality TV show binge session. Plus his parents were super cool and we can drink out there as long as we stayed at his house. It was tons of fun even though I was quite scared of the dark. So I would just not go outside after a certain time because there was little lighting and the nearest neighbor was about a mile away. I always felt a weird energy driving to or from his place if it was late at night, but never had anything happen until one night. The drive out there was a long winding two-way road that had thick trees on both sides, and you passed one of the city's largest cemeteries on the way. Barely any lighting, of course, besides the street lamps every once in a while. And very little traffic. It's all inherently a bit creepy, and I'll admit to having sped through this section of the road many times to get through it as quickly as possible. This specific night was perfect spring weather, so I was driving with my windows down, listening to music. It was around 10 p.m. and I was coming around one of the curves on the road when I had to essentially slam on my brakes. Right in front of me, in the middle of the road, maybe 50 yards away, was what looked like a family. Again, picture a completely pitch black road with a thick forest on both sides and only my headlights to show what's in front of me. This was a family of 3 or 4. A tall, slim woman, an average-heighted man, a child, short hair, but I couldn't tell the gender based off of clothing and couldn't see their face. Maybe around 8 years old, and the mother was pushing a stroller. Their clothes looked normal, not tattered but not nice. They were also not carrying any kind of light source, meaning before I had arrived behind them in my car, they had been walking in the pitch black. They were all facing away from me, walking completely silent in the middle of the street, the same direction I was heading. I had turned my music down to hear if they were speaking or had music playing. They didn't. The hairs on my arm immediately stood up. I came to a stop in the road behind them. I sat there for a moment to see if they would move. They seemed to be completely unaffected by me and didn't even turn their heads slightly, nor did they attempt to move out of the way. I literally thought that I was going insane or that I was dreaming. It was so surreal. Before I had really had time to fully process and register what I was seeing and how truly strange it was, they all at the same time stopped walking and very slowly turned to face my car. This scared the absolute shit out of me. I honestly didn't even give enough time to look at their faces as they turned. I immediately threw my car in reverse, sent it backwards for probably a full 20 seconds before flipping a U-turn, nearly running myself off the road and booking it in the other direction. The only thing I remember noticing is that the stroller looked to be completely empty. This was the part that sticks in my mind the most. I've never felt terror like that in my life. I checked my rearview mirror probably 1,000 times before getting to a main road and never saw a glimpse of them. In fact, I never saw a glimpse of them ever again. I tried asking my friend and his family about it to only look essentially like I was insane because of the way they looked at me. Every time I tell this story, I get one of 3 reactions. They immediately think I'm cuckoo, they think I'm lying, or have had something sort of similar happen to them. I really don't care if no one believes me, honestly. It was and still is the creepiest thing to ever happen to me. I think about it all the time. It was either some weird-ass family trying to scare the shit out of someone, a distraction for attempted robbery, assault, etc. I'm going to tell myself for probably the rest of the life that it was the first option. In this episode, we talked about home invasion and why it's really just terrifying if you think about just someone unsolicited coming into your house while you're sleeping, somebody watching you while you're sleeping, or creepy children on the road. It's all very terrifying. It's crazy to think that some of these things have probably happened to OPs. We have no way of knowing if these are true stories or not. They are all first-hand accounts, and I will link every single one of these stories in the link down below. I hope you enjoyed watching this. This is Reddit Stories from Hell.